Welcome back, guys, to episode 13 now of Borderline Genius. A little bit of a hiatus in between packs. By way of introduction, for those who I haven't met before, my name is Andrew. I'm the creator of This Little Guy, Footy Feud, an Australian licensed football card game, and also the developer of an officially licensed Marvel board game as well, which I'm stoked to say is finally on the market, hit the shelves, which is pretty exciting. Which is great. But we're here chatting tonight with Tim, who is the founder and creator of Board and Sorcery. Tim and I met at DevCon a couple of weeks ago, which is, I guess, a smaller convention pre-PAX for us Australian game designers, and then saw each other around the traps of PAX over what was a pretty full-on few days. So, Tim, fantastic to have you on the show this evening.
All right, thanks so much for having me on, Andrew. It's awesome to come on and talk about board games and stuff. So, especially after PAX, you kind of need that time to kind of reflect a little bit. So it's always good to have a good conversation afterwards. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm sure, mate, as we just said before, we'll get onto PAX pretty soon, and that's a bit of a theme for tonight's episode, guys. Just how to prepare for a convention and how to reflect on what you get out of it, but. Even before PAX, tell me a bit more about Board and Sorcery, your journey into board game design.
Yeah, definitely.
All that stuff.
I about 10, 15 years ago, I was a video game writer and reviewer for a few online places. And then I got sick of writing about bad games and went into video game design. I studied, loved it, but really found the lack of game design roles was really hard.
Okay.
I jumped around a lot of QA and testing roles, and I jumped into different companies where I could fit. But eventually gave it all up. But there's always that little lingering thing in the back of your mind, and you're just like, I want to design stuff. And so 6 years ago, I kind of got serious with it. I took the idea of Fat Cats Inc. to a group of friends at a bar, and we started playing with a paper prototype that was literally white cards that I wrote on. And they loved it, and it kind of built from there. And so for the last 6 years, been working on and off Fat Cats, COVID, family, life, all those things that paused game design for a while. But in the last couple of years, I've started taking it a bit more seriously, and Fat Cats is basically feature complete and ready to go, and it's live on Kickstarter now. And then we actually raced to get our second game out, Treacherous Tides, where a friend brought me this old dice mechanic, and we kind of started fleshing out this really cool older style dice idea that we're playing in pubs and building it into have its own story and lore and a bit more depth for players without just that luck-based roll. So yeah.
Fantastic. I think, and thanks for elaborating on that as well, because I wasn't aware of the video game background. So I guess even for any designers who are early in their design phase, or they're thinking about how to get into board game design for the first time, well, what made you help kind of get that leap? Like, you kind of had this creative itch and you wanted to keep designing, but what made you kind of pivot away from the video game scene and then into tabletop game development?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the simplicity of being able to create something, having a set of cards or a set of dice and being able to quickly mock something up and quickly make changes became the pivotal to me. One of my key strengths when I was working in video games was I loved rapid prototyping, and I loved being able to quickly put together a prototype and show someone, here's my idea. Yeah. And those sort of skills really translated straight to board games a lot more. But I didn't need a team behind me. I personally couldn't code something well enough to be able to be a release. But I can get cards printed that are release quality. This was even before those sort of AI art problems that people play with these days. But even just being able to make a game that people can play at home, where you just write on the back of cards. We've all done this, where you slip into our magic sets, there's little sleeves, and you play, and it's just tangible quality, and you get that feedback right away. And that's something you just can't get in video games, and kind of something that started me down the path of board games. Because a lot of the learning that you do for board game design does translate really well. People still stick around those rule of threes, the psychology behind why you play or what feels good and what feels bad still applies across the board games. And so I took everything I learned from my university there and basically started applying it to my games. In Fat Cats Incorporated, for one really great example, there is cards that feel utterly broken
Mm-hmm.
because I want the player to feel good when they play them.
Yeah, awesome.
I want them to. I wanted to be able to have the table either love or hate them when these cards are played, or laugh or get that sense of enjoyment.
Yeah.
And yeah, design-wise, on a piece of paper, when you try to scale it, it's broken, completely broken.
Yeah.
Why would anyone want to change places with someone else at the table? And but when you realize you take over all their stuff and you can continue play, or some people worked out you can skip turns by this mechanic. Everyone's like, what? So yeah, it gets really interesting.
Fantastic. And I think there, like, what I take away from that is just the ease is underplaying it a little bit, but just how you can get a minimum viable product underway reasonably quickly, but then how quickly you can iterate off that as well. So you can understand, you can get a group of mates or family or random playtesters together, and you can get pretty live feedback, right, in terms of what's working, what needs tweaking, what needs overhauling. But I also love that piece as well that you say there. I was at an event that Jonathan put on with Melbourne Incubator, and one thing that he said is really important when playtesting is that you really want your audience to really feel the impact. And it just feels like what you were saying there with the whole skip the turn mechanic or other mechanics that you highlighted, that feeling really comes through. And if you can have that sense of what feeling are you going for, and it might be frustration, it might be excitement, it might be a bit more tempered, but if you can have an idea of what that is to guide your design principle and you see it play out in the flesh, even better, right?
Oh, it's so good. When we were doing some early play testing for Fat Cats, there was a few cards that were like way too powerful that we had to like pull back. But then cards just didn't really impact enough, so we also cut them out. We scaled up the playtesting, especially after COVID, because one of the entire philosophies of Board and Sorcery was that we wanted to bring experiences back to the table. And I told this a lot at PAX, that the best moments for me are not who wins and loses, but moments in the game that you're just like, wow, I can't believe that happened. And so a lot of the games we make and a lot of the design choices we make in those games try to include those things to try to build up to that moment.
Yeah.
And it's probably based from some of my favorite games. So yeah.
Yeah. What are some examples of that, out of curiosity?
For our games, there was actually, shout out to Jay from Surf's Up Stoked. Him and his group of mates played at last year's PAX over at Collaboratory. And I remember watching somebody play one of the big one-off cards in the game where they took everything of Jay's, basically all his production or everything he's been setting up for like 4 or 5 turns, just took it all. And they gave him some money. And then his next turn is he used that money on another card that would basically means you can remove a card from money. So he basically took out his win condition, which is money, and spent all of it to take that other guy out of the game completely as well. And so he was just like, great. They were both having a laugh, and the other 2 guys are like, I didn't think I was going to win this, but what just happened? Yeah. And it just made for such a memorable moment that it's still a story I'm telling a year later, So
yeah, fantastic. And I guess like there's that shock factor to it, right? It's like here's what the optimal logical choice could be on paper, but based on who's playing and based on what they're looking to get out of it, right? There can be these extra outcomes play out that provide that shock and awe value.
And sometimes you can't see them coming. I remember in one of the first or second play tests of Fat Cats, I was playing with a friend of mine, and because you get 3 actions on it, he played all these negatives on himself on his first 2 turns, and I was just watching him. I just had to be like, oh, excuse me, mate, do you know what you're doing? Are you sure you know how you're playing? These are not supposed to be really played on you. The negative cards, you usually play them on the others. And then he swapped seats with me. And so I inherited all this negative placement, and I'm just like, you've got me. How did I not see that coming, that you can just negative yourself and then swap me into it?
Yeah.
As opposed to just spreading the love around everyone else. And I just did not see that being an ability, and he blew my mind with it. And he was like, can I actually do this? I'm like, yeah, that's totally fun. Yeah. Did you have fun with that mechanic? Yes, I loved it. Awesome. Yeah. I'll keep it in. So
how good is that, right? When like implications or end states that you haven't thought of as a designer, your audience gets there first. And then, as you say, it's like, well, it shows ease of pick up and playability that they've got it, but then to take the game into a different spot that you didn't even think possible. That's a pretty cool moment as a designer, yeah?
It is some of my favorites, and it's probably the reason why I love doing conventions.
Yeah,
I love playing with groups. I love taking my games to a pub and, hey, you want to come play? Hey, you want to do stuff? So
yeah.
yeah, I'm always excited to see what sort of combinations people can make up with the cards.
Mm,
And even 6 years on of playing it, I'm still getting surprised. So.
yeah. That's fantastic. Just before we dive into conventions in particular and your approach to them, because like whenever I swung by at PAX, your table was chockers the whole time. You mentioned before how you've been at it for 6 years, but the last couple of years, as we've been out of COVID, you've really ramped it up. Like what does ramping it up look like from your perspective? With how much time you spend, what you spend your time on, what you
Yeah.
focus on, what you don't focus on. Yeah, really keen to understand that.
Yeah, cool. So I guess Fat Cat's kind of started as a deck of cards, and it's slowly gonna built from this deck of cards that I very just much liked a very popular deal game going around at the time,
Mhm.
and I wanted to build something better. And so it started with this deck of cards and some borrowed cash from that same game's brother,
Yeah,
and it kind of built from there. And then I started adding locations, and I started adding companies, and started fleshing out more of my own mechanics to it. And once it kind of got to a very stable and lovely state. And I was like, right, before my son is born, I'm going to finish this game. My son is 2.5, and I still say I'm working on it, but it's still, I'm still getting there. But it's once I kind of hit that stable state, I kind of knew those components. So then I started talking to manufacturers. I started trying to get prototypes made. What components do I need? How much do I need from it? What minimum orders? Fat Cats is quite unique in a way that I have a clock piece, and originally it wasn't a clock piece, but I needed a spinner that would spin from the middle out, whereas everyone else
okay.
just does like twister style spinners.
Yeah,
So that went from a list of 30, 40 manufacturers down to 10.
yeah.
I'm playing with some paper money, 5.
Mhm.
I have a minimum order quantity of maybe 500 to 1,000. Great,
Yeah,
2.
yeah,
And so those the things I sort of ramped up, was looking at partners, looking for shipping partners, looking for manufacturers,
hmm
making sure I can bring this vision of this prototype to life without
yeah,
forking out a lot of money.
yeah,
And then from the design, doing more playtesting,
yeah.
try to get a community building, try to get people playing. Me and a friend were shooting TikTok skits all year about playing board games,
Yeah.
just to try and get noticed. I've done writing some ad sets. I've been getting people interested. I've been showing it off at conventions, taking it to board game shops, and just trying to do little things where I can. I know the game's solid, so I haven't taken it to those incubators and things like that in this
hmm
year because of
Yeah.
I don't need design help with this one. I have taken other games to playtesting nights before, and I've got a lot of great feedback from them. So this one is like, it's there, and that's sort of ramping up to what's the next step.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. And I think that like if I'm to at the gross risk of oversimplifying all of that, I think that like the really key insight there for me is it's not just focusing on the game side of things, it's then focusing on like, to use your words, how are you going to bring your vision to life? So
Yeah,
it's then a lot more about understanding the supply chain, understanding the manufacturers, what components you need. So it's a lot more than just exclusively focusing on the game design mechanics, which can be hard as game designers, right? Because we do get a lot of energy from watching other people play our games, right? And then testing those mechanics and seeing how they come to life. But
yeah,
there's this whole other part that's probably a bit less glamorous, or doesn't quite get the heart rate
and
up in the same way. But it's absolutely critical, right? If fundamentally the
yeah.
game's to launch and launch successfully.
And and if you just want your game to be played by your friends, that's totally fine. And if you've got it to the best state you can through printing locally or printing one-off copies through GameCraft, amazing.
Yeah,
Congratulations, you've got a game, you've got a product. But if you are a person who's looking to take it to that next level, or take it to Kickstarter, or take it to even self-funding,
yeah,
then you have to answer those questions. You have to spend those long nights. You have to spend emails or even getting up at 4 a.m. to have meetings online with
mm,
international partners.
yeah,
And they're just those things that must-haves, unfortunately. So.
yeah. Very true. Well, thanks very much for all that context, mate. I think that's all fantastic. I think it's a nice little reminder as to why we get into this venture in the first place. But the different hats that we have to be prepared to wear to different extents if the vision is to come to life. As you said, you enjoy the convention side of things. You still enjoyed the play testing and showcasing your games out there, be it to friends, family, or members of the general community. So, I really appreciated the post that you put on the Facebook forum probably about a week or so ago now. So, I'm just really keen to get your thoughts overall with, I guess, PAX is the biggest convention that we have here in Australia, but even kind of what made you sign up to want to be part of the indie showcase, I suppose, and how that evolved from being involved in the collaboratory last year, where you're able to showcase it for the first time.
So last year I kind of slight step back, but part of the game design process is you have to show off your game to others. Regardless of what happens, you have to do that.
Yeah.
And part of that process is you have to blindly show your game to others. Eventually people are going to buy copies of it and they'll be going off your rule books or your things, so you will not be there to help them. So eventually you have to let go. And so part of my steps letting go was I applied for collaboratory.
Yeah.
It's still a bit hand-holdy, but I knew Fat Cats was solid. I thought it was going to be great. Let's just have a chat.
Yeah.
I also wanted to talk to any publishers around that time. I think I only talked to one. And I also heard what their release schedules were like, and that kind of made me go, right, I'm fully going by myself this time.
Yeah.
And so I looked at it this year and I went, collaboratory is not for me. I've showcased Fat Cats. I had Treacherous Tides coming. I could get a table. But what do I do from here? Let's look at what a booth looks like. I've worked in beer previously and I've done beer events. I know the setup. I used to not exactly be the person. I didn't sign all the checks, but I was the person who organized all the boxes and set up all the stands the day of. So I had some nice idea about how stands and how functions and bump ins and bump outs work.
Yeah.
And what the prices of booths do really cost. And when I looked at the original PAX ones, I was kind of a bit shocked and a bit, I don't know, I'm a small business. I don't really have any product to sell. The goal originally was to have Fat Cats there. So when I applied back in January, I believe, you apply to sort of get into PAX. I was accepted after I knew I wasn't going through the Kickstarter. So that was about May. So I think, I applied around February and got the notification about May.
Yeah.
And they offer you a spot. This was for the Indie Rising ones at least, where they have a very limited number. I think it's about 8 to 16 spots, depending. And so I thought more people would jump at this, and I thought I'd be having a gun at it. But I think about 40 applied, and I think there's 16 spots. But then things happen, and people drop in and drop out.
Yeah.
And so I was very lucky, and they basically went, here is the number of booth that you've got. And here's a very loose diagram of where you're at. Yeah. From my personal experience with beer, I know that my old bosses fought for different locations in different spots.
Yeah.
Because when you're one of 100 at a beer festival, it's very hard to get noticed.
Very true. Yeah.
I looked at the games from last year and I looked at which booth I stopped at. And I found myself, I think I was actually on the same booth that I spent the most time on last year's PAX.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, cool. Yeah.
So I thought, okay, that must be a good spot. But I wasn't near the corners or the doors where you could do a bit more space. You could kind of push your table a bit more. But so when I applied, I got offered the spot and I went, yep, great, I'll take it. I didn't want to fight for anything else. I didn't want to ask or request some other bigger space, and I just decided to take it. And luckily, PAX is really good. They split the payment over the next 5-6 months.
Okay, so great. Yeah.
As a small indie designer, when you're obviously it's not your full-time job, you can afford to slowly pay it off. So
yeah, fantastic. But I think even that kind of process, right, of trying to go through, and it certainly helps having a background in events management and understanding in how to showcase different products of different categories, how to stand out in a very crowded trade hall. Yep. Just to then at least have a process in terms of if it's a booth, why or why not? And then if it's going to be part of the indie showcase, what are the pros and cons of that?
Yeah. And
so I guess once you then,
Yes,
Sorry,
and what?
after you.
Sorry, and once you kind of have that idea of like what is the pros and cons, if you're gonna make that step, you make it. And I mean, like I'm already thinking next year, it's like how do I fit in a 3 meter booth? Can I afford this 3 meter booth?
Yeah, yeah.
You always try to think bigger than what you are, I
Oh,
guess. So,
absolutely. And I think it's important to dream as part of this, right? Like, as you said, some of our ambitions to this creative pursuit is to create a print and play game that is heaps of fun for your inner sanctum. That's
yeah,
fantastic, right? That's what your ambition is. Awesome. But if you're looking to commercialize it and for it to be a decent side hustle revenue stream for you, then there's no shame in thinking big. So I think it's awesome that you're already thinking about what has to be true next year to, if you're to be in the same spot or if you're to be in
yeah.
a different spot, and what milestones and goalposts you kind of need to achieve between now and then in order to make that happen.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some amazing insight into like I could talk for hours on actual set design and stuff like that. And Jet, who did Wrong Answers Only, if you didn't see his setup, he had couches in that same space. Like most of us had tables. He immediately stood out, and it was so smart to turn his booth space into a living room.
Yeah.
And just thinking outside the box like that is stuff that can really help. And so when you're always thinking about what you want your table to look like, what you want your booth to look like, what you want your own convention to look like,
Yeah.
think how you're going to stand out a bit more.
Yeah. And that's probably a really good thing to dive into a bit more for someone who has no understanding on it whatsoever. But like, how much creative control or freedom do you have with that X by X space, with basically how your brand fronts up, right? Because I know that there's kind of the standard panel, I guess,
Yeah.
that kind of showcases, here's who the brand is and an icon or some artwork that I'm guessing you provide PAX potentially. But like, apart from me just guessing, I have literally no understanding on how standardized or how customized you can all make that space to, as you say, stand out as much as possible.
Yeah, so PAX is also really good. You submit the artwork for that banner piece,
Yeah.
and they get it printed and sized and up for you, ready to go. So
Oh, brilliant.
you walk
Yeah.
in, it's there. There is also back and forth email. So if the printer goes, this is not going to look right, you need to resize it. If you are just a person who's fumbling around in Illustrator and not someone who's print ready, graphic design minded,
Yeah.
they will at least email you, say these are wrong, can you upgrade it? And you watch a few YouTube videos and you upskill it
Yeah.
as best you can. So that was my personal process right there. But yeah, so they will get that stuff printed for you, which mine is sitting in the garage too at the moment. So they let you take it as well if you want.
Yeah. Oh, it's a cool little souvenir.
Yeah, it's great. And we had it up at the when we did a launch night the other week too. So that was very fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yes, so they let you have that. In terms of other creative control, they give you 1 table and 4 chairs for the indie rising, or if you're in the other areas, they kind of give you 2 chairs and a couple of tables.
Okay.
Or it's blank. And you'll have a choice of small setup or blank. And everything else is on you. I learnt from someone really early that I remember someone, I think it was maybe even on the Tabletop Games Lab, where this person did this amazing banner art on the back of their booth. Like it was this awesome 3x3 banner of their game. And they put the title at the bottom. So once the table came in and people were standing there and playing, you couldn't see the name of the game because there was just too many people around it. And so thinking critically about that becomes the hardest part and stuff that you can only learn by seeing and doing. So with my booth, I put the games at the top, because, made them up high as I could. And then down the bottom corners, I put little QR codes and stuff, because I thought people who were sitting right next to it would be like, oh, great, I'll just scan this right here and check it out. Or I put some little other things at the bottom so that when people took selfies at the table, they'd be included. Unfortunately, I didn't think about my stack of products or things and other stuff there, so a lot of that was covered by the end of it as well. So just because small table, not much space.
Yeah. But I think even the kind of that like eyes wide closed kind of aspect, right? And just really thinking critically, as you say, about what do you want your booth to look like. I think that just that nuance of knowing it's very hard to actually picture how your banner's going to be there until physically you front up at PAX, where you realise, this is actually how high half a metre is. And to that point there, it's like, oh, well, if I want to sell because I assume you're allowed to sell games at the booth as well. So like, well, okay, if I'm selling them here, then how much real estate is that going to take up? So a lot of those, in some ways, like learnings that you only get through demonstrating, right? Like you're not going to get a perfect first time, but yeah, how you can take those learnings on board for next time, I guess as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something you can't teach, and it's something you can't, like, you can only learn by doing, and you have to you adapt over the 3 days. So I got there in my boxes for the games and the stock, and I was like, where am I going to put this if I'm going to play? And so kind of inched my table out a little bit into the space where I'm not supposed to be, and just kind of just inch. Sorry, PAX, by the way, but just to fit the box in there to hide it behind the stuff. Yeah. And then you see other people who've had they just spread out. So in terms of normal conventions, we have a 3x3 grid. You have those walls up, and that's your sort of space, and it's usually tiled out for you, or got those mats down for you. Yeah. And that's the space you're working with. And if you want to do something cool with it, that's fine. But my biggest takeaway is always have somewhere to hide your stuff. Whether it's copies of your game or your personal items, or even just water, sanitizer, and mints. Just anything that you have that you need for that weekend, find some way to hide it, whether it's through a treasure chest as a really cool icon in the middle, or a tabletop, or behind a shelf. Put a fake shelf in, and then just put all your stuff in there. And they're the biggest things that I've learned through the years of doing beer festivals, was we always had to hide kegs and ice buckets somewhere. How do you do that? True. So
Oh, and that's a really good call, especially even on the mints and sanitization stations and whatnot. Like for someone who, as I said, when I came past your spot over the 3 days, it always looked slammed, which is the best problem to have, right? But how did you keep your energy levels going for 3 days? Because I found that even, I was just playing my game in a free play area, right? And I could hardly talk on Saturday night. So how do you kind of keep the energy level really upbeat so that everybody's first experience of coming across Fat Cats Inc., Board and Sorcery, is the one that you want them to have, as opposed to a really fatigued experience because you've been pedaling for 3 days?
Yeah, I mean, it's I was really lucky to have two friends, my partner and a friend help out, and then a swag of other friend I was able to watch for a bit.
Yeah.
With one thing I should touch on briefly with PAX is they give you 2 passes for the Rising section, which ideally means that one of you would be there and then the next person would be there, and they might overlap a bit. But I ended up having to buy a 3rd pass because I wanted 3.
Okay.
We wanted to not stress everybody out by working, because we're there from 10 a.m. in the morning to, we can be there till midnight. And because that section doesn't close then. And so we were just like, well, if we're going to be here for, 14 hours a day, do you really want just 2 of you there constantly?
Absolutely.
I ended up picking up another extra pass, and so we had 3, and that worked out pretty good. I was there for most of it, and how to keep the energies up was a lot of coffee, a lot of Red Bull. Well, actually, to be fair, on the Friday, I was alone for the first 6 hours. So I stayed away from the coffees and the Red Bull because I didn't want to have to run off to the bathroom every 5 minutes.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
And so I had lollies, I had snacks, I had other supplies hidden in those boxes at the back. And I also did a little treasure chest full of chocolate coins. So just having little bits of chocolate here and there just helped boost me up. I kept talking. And I think the best thing is the vibe of the place. The minute I walked in and I saw that stand and I knew it was printed well, and I knew I was like, this is going to be mine for this weekend, and I set it all up. I kind of just took a step back, took the photos, and just went, all right, I'm ready.
Yeah.
And keeping that fresh mentality lasted until Sunday. I loved every second of it. Like you said, it was very busy. We had 2 games running demos constantly, and we were just flipping between them. We probably upset a few people because they wanted to try out one game, but we wanted to play the other, which we can touch on later. But it became a sticky point for me, which I talked about in the post. I would not recommend in a small space like that demoing 2 games.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Yep.
but it drew a lot of people back, and a lot of people tried. Some people, I think about 40%, tried both games
Awesome.
over the weekend, which was
Yep.
great. I wanted them to try me. They now trust me as a brand. They enjoy both games. Great. They don't trust a game, and they trust
Yep.
me as the brand now, and
Yep.
that was more worthwhile for everything as well. So that
Fantastic.
that keeps you excited.
Oh, absolutely. And I reckon you probably just touched on it there as well. But knowing that, you're demoing a finished product, you said before that even when you've upscaled how you spend your time on this venture, it's less about the testing the game mechanics, but more about the other sides of the business angle to it.
Yeah.
When you attend a convention such as PAX, like, what are you really looking to get out of it so that when you walk away on that final Sunday night, you just want to crash in bed because it's been energizing and fatiguing? Like, you can walk away and say, this event was really good because I achieved X. Like, what was that for yourselves, do you think?
Um, I think I achieved that new people saw my game and enjoy it. I think it's
Right.
fundamentally is the basic for me.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite moments was in Treacherous Tides. There's 6 captains you can play as, and we made an exclusive card for PAX. We thought that won't get a lot of interest.
Yeah.
It didn't get as much as we thought, but some people really enjoyed it, had a nice little bonus. But in terms of the original 6 captains, the original 6 on the design floor about 6 months ago were all celebrity parodies.
Okay. Yeah.
And we kind of changed them up, and we put a bit more. We worked with the artists who got some of the celebrity parodiness is still in them, but we changed them up. We put more age and diversity across all the characters.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
And I just remember sitting there at PAX, and one girl sat down and went, "I want to play as the Chinese girl," and she picked that character.
Yeah.
And that moment for me stood out above almost everything else about PAX, because a smart change that we made about bringing and adding diversity to our characters really impacted someone's choice and really impacted their day. And they were super happy with the fact that they could have this character like them.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that was more fulfilling and more rewarding
That's so
than
good.
anything. And
Yeah.
and so it just made me want to think, what other character diversities have I now missed out on that I need to add?
Yeah.
Uh,
That's
and
brilliant.
so,
Absolutely brilliant.
and like that's sort of like the moment I take away from this entire weekend. I could pay for 1,000 more passes, but if I had that moment, it's priceless.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Mate, that's fantastic. Like, and I think that that's probably pretty similar to what I was probably looking to get out of it as well, albeit, me just demoing my game in the free play zone, which
yeah.
maybe wasn't the best way to do it looking back. But although I was still pretty slammed the whole time. But I think just that positive reinforcement on your design choices, or seeing that feeling come through firsthand, right? Like, you spoke about the feeling of a first-time player playing a tactic on Fat Cats that you didn't see coming, and just the impact that had on the table. This is a very different type of impact. Still a
Oh
design
yeah,
choice that I guess this is a design choice that you made very consciously, hoping to have this impact, and having the opportunity to actually see it play out firsthand. One, just so good to see that moment in the flesh, but then, as you say, it starts getting the creative juices flowing in terms of, okay, like, if I've just started going down this path, what does the next iteration look like? What does the next iteration look like after that, and so forth?
exactly. And um, Treacherous Tides being a pirate sort of captaining game, we already have hinted at the sequel being Treacherous Trails set in the Wild West, and I'm like, how do I bring more diversity into the Wild West when
Yeah.
I'm locked to such a region?
Yeah.
But there's ideas already flowing there. There's already thoughts. Why not have like a wheelchair wagon like character in something like
Yeah.
that? And
Yeah.
little things like that, just to help add that diversity across all the captains in that sort of series that we're working on. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like an incredible success, right? In terms of even what you took on board from Collaboratory last year, in terms of how you wanted your stand to look and feel, the fact that you had a bit of theatre, you wore the captain's hat, as you say, you had the treasure chest with the money in it, and I might have broken one of my no sugar day pledges and
Yeah.
indulging in one or two of those chocolates myself as well. Making sure that you kept yourself energized, kept yourself hydrated, took on board some of the learnings that other people have shared regarding how you set that banner up optimally so that your branding isn't lost. So I think already a number of ticks from that standpoint. How about when you're thinking through to next year? What are a couple of things that you'd like to do differently?
Oh, yeah,
this year,
definitely.
do you think?
I feel like, and I'm just going to talk about Fat Cats for the second of like running a Kickstarter at a place where people want to spend money and enjoy product there was not a smart decision.
Okay.
I think next year I would look at using a convention like PAX to build an email list, to build a follow-up for a month or two down the track. Launching it that weekend, and I know a few Kickstarters did launch around that weekend, and I was trying to keep tabs on everybody, and we were all slowly progressing the same sort of way. But just building that. If you're a designer and you're at Collaboratory or in the Tabletop Rising, and you are not got a QR code to get people to fill in a form about it and how much they enjoyed it, you're doing something wrong. And I didn't do that again this year. Because I wasn't looking for feedback, I was looking for direct sale of purchase. But if people put in a feedback form, they might opt into your mailing list. If they've opted into the mailing list, they've already played it, they already know about it, they're already talking about it. If you give them more feedback and emails, they're gonna stay on board. So I think what I would change is how I built my community leading up to it. I mean, I had one guy who came back. He probably played about 6 games of Fat Cats over the weekend. He just kept coming back with a different friend.
How good is that?
He loved it. And that's awesome because he's now a follower for life. But I don't think I got his email address.
Okay.
And so one thing I would very much so is find a way to gather information of people who want to follow you. If they enjoyed it, ask them why they enjoyed it. And do it through a form. Do it through a Google form. They're cheap, easy. You get a free QR code, done. It takes 5 minutes, and it's something that I should have set up better. I think better things I would do is I want more lights on my booth. One hidden thing about PAX when applying is if you don't want to use conventions Wi-Fi, the free Wi-Fi is limited for a few hours, you have to tether or you have to pay for Wi-Fi. For the weekend, you also have to pay for power. So I luckily had a giant power bank and that ran my phones and my Square and everything I needed, even tethering and hotspotting for the entire weekend. So I would look at possibly seeing if I could afford the power and bringing some more flashiness to my booth, more attention seeking, I guess. The guys at Mini Mega were showing off Bonza, the board game, and they had a screen. Demoing, playing. And I thought that's an awesome idea because if people are standing around, they're obviously watching, but if you can't see because you've crowded enough, having a screen slightly up on the middle of your poster sort of thing is also a great opportunity. Or having a screen turned sideways at the front somewhere. Just really nice little addition to kind of bring it home. And then there was a couple other booths around me who had lovely nature decors and things like that. And so I thought bringing a bit more of the theming to the table would have been a bit better. Juggling 2 games in the space I had, bad idea, but if I had a table, I would probably do up a tablecloth or get something printed and big that showed off more of the game or the brand. I would find ways for people to kind of act into their own characters as running these companies or CEOs and little name badges or something, just something to tie people in a bit more, just to really hone in on it. And they're the type of small decisions that I would probably make.
Interesting. It's how you take that sense of theatre to the next level.
Basically, it's the 2 things for any convention you have to work on is your elevator pitch and how to play that theatre. Because if people are involved in it, they love it. And you need that pitch to get them in, and then you need that, like, I don't know, just that set to really feel comfortable.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good call regarding the elevator pitch as well, and that's something that I've been thinking about. And I guess anybody who was at PAX probably had a really good opportunity to practice it and refine it a couple of
Yeah.
weekends ago. What are some of your principles in terms of how you go about kind of absolutely nailing the crux of what you want that elevator pitch to sound like?
Oh yeah. So I was quite lucky that when I did my games design degree, that um, I could talk a lot, and so people picked me to have very pivotal roles in those pitching. So I've been pitching for about 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
I recently, in the Monday after PAX, started a sales job because obviously someone saw me being pitching.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the things needed, I just try to boil it down to 2 or 3 sentences.
Yeah.
And so for Fat Cats Incorporated, it is a simple little game where you are a CEO of a company, and as you play cards that get you lots of money, they also destroy the earth, just like real life, right? But don't worry, you've got a lot of funding cards to help boost you, and you've got action cards to help shut down the things. Action cards are like lawsuits, like Trump cards, or fun little things like executive orders. But there's also a few overpowered cards in there, like I've sort of touched on, but they're in there because they're fun. And so when people sort of hear that little line, they're like, oh, this is cool. They've heard Trump cards. They've got some political interest in it. They like the idea it's kind of tied to this kind of real world idea that everyone's fighting to get rich before the world blows up.
Yeah.
It's kind of satire to them, and they're just like, oh, this is great. And so Fat Cats kind of pitches itself in terms of that idea that it was kind of built around that pitch, I think, more than anything. And a lot of the elements, design choices came in just around that pitch.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic.
And then Treacherous Tides is a game about mutinying your mates for treasure and gold. And that's basically all it really is.
Yeah.
And that's all it needs to be. And people have got their interest. They're like, oh, I get to mutiny my friends.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
so,
there's a really clear hook with both.
Yeah. And I think that's it. You've nailed it, right? You need a hook. So whatever your hook is, whether it's a mechanic or a design or an action, or even if it is like there is a bomb card somewhere in this deck. A what? Oh my God, that sounds exciting. Like just whatever that thing is, make sure it's front and center and within like the first sentence.
Yeah.
I want to hit a hook. If you're at home writing this 1,000 times, take it into like ChatGPT, ask it to rewrite it and give you 12 examples. And then see which one reading it sounds better to you.
Yeah.
And just, or combine them or play with them or rewrite it yourself, just what do you want it to say and how do you want it to deliver the message? That's it.
Yeah. And get to that crux as well, right? Like just and keep it simple, as you said, like no more than 3 sentences.
Yeah.
If you can't nail it in 30 seconds, right, then our audience is unfortunately probably going to lose interest and move on to the next booth, right? Which is the opposite of what we want.
I mean, like, again, like, I know Twilight Imperium is not super complicated, but the idea of like a simple elevator pitch for that is like, here is a space opera where you can have military or political decisions across this entire galaxy, and you're like, wow, that's interesting. And it goes for 10 hours. And you're like, yes.
Yeah.
That's like, to some that might be the negative, but if you amplify that as the positive, it can be, So
yeah. Absolutely. No, I think that's a fantastic insight and absolutely so critical, right? That you can have the theatre and you can draw people in, but how you almost convert them to then being interested, to them wanting to play, is the quality of the elevator pitch. So that's a critical gate to get people to pass through.
And to follow up with that as well is if you've got a 3.5 hour epic war game at PAX that you're trying to show off, find a way to have a 15-20 minute demo. Find either whether it's you pre-setting up turn 3 for them to just come in and play that turn with a lot of action, a lot of different stuff without overwhelming them. Awesome. If it's them having a shorter, so with Fat Cats, we usually have a 3-hour timer for most 4 to 6 player games.
Yeah.
Or timer, but it's like 1 hour of real time, 3 hours of game time.
Mm-hmm.
We were playing 1 hour game times, so about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so they're the things, right? If you need to be able to demo it to a lot of people, you need to be able to show it off to a lot of things. And if they're hooked by the pitch, great, and they're sitting down, you're going to bore them after 2.5 hours.
Yeah. 100%.
So find a way to strip it down to like what a vertical slice is what we used to use in video games. It's got everything they want to see and everything they want to do, and I'll know exactly how to play it from there, either way they go.
I love that one. I hadn't heard that expression before, the vertical slice. I think that's a really key nugget.
It's awesome. It's like just taking that slice of that cake or that pie. Like, you might not have the prettiness of level 1 done, or you might not have the boss fight at the end. But if you can get this one fight scene that has the jumps, the whips, the mechanics for that, amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, mate, just before I get you to ask a question for me or the community, which is a bit of a habit on this show, what's next? So you got Fatcats, as you say, is at a stage where it can be published, which is exciting, and Treacherous Ties, which was also at PAX, and then also looking to do Treacherous Trails after that. So what's next for Board and Sorcery over the next 6 to 12 months?
So at least I had the idea that I wanted to release at least 2 games every year. One small, simple 15-20 minute game, which is the Tides, and then Fatcats being a bigger, long 1 hour sort of thing. And because I've been so focused on these 2 products for the last 6 months, I have 10 other amazing ideas that I just need to play test and focus and pick out which ones are the best. So Treacherous Trails is getting into a prototyping stage early next year. We've got some ideas, but we're trying to make it in a way that you can take the captains from the Pirate game or the captains from the West game and bring them over if you want. And the game will still play fine. So it's prototyped in some of them, but some of them are a bit tricky. Trying to find new, unique mechanics that will work in a Wild West setting or a pirate setting without interrupting those games too much. So it's a really interesting balance challenge that I'm playing around with. And then I'm tossing up between 2 other big games for next year. Not sure which one I like more. I've been playing with this cyberpunk city builder game for a long time. Where it's kind of like hidden deception, because that's my favorite style of game. Hidden roles, goals, mafia style driven cyberpunk city control element thing. But most of the playtests were going on for 2.5, 3 hours, and it just became really hard to play. So I've started working on a small, placeholder game. I guess not really placeholder, but it's like a cabin thing where you're just trying to build the most luxurious cabin. My partner's Finnish, and we spent a couple of months ago, we spent some time in the Finnish cabins over their summer.
Brilliant.
And I was just like, and like collecting water and having to build your own fire and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, how do I turn this relaxing cabin experience into a board game? And I'm just like writing notes the whole time. So I'm thinking of bringing that one out possibly next year, but we'll see.
Fantastic.
So hopefully sticking with the small game and big game, but the small game, the dice idea came from a friend of mine. And so I'm always looking for other small games that people are like younger designers who are looking to try and get help, who might have a little bit of knowledge but need help connecting with an artist or connecting with a publisher or connecting with a small print run, and just seeing if they want to match up with me and we can make it hopefully into something. Use some of my connections and resources that I've built to just try and hopefully bring something together. And I'm not the richest of men, but if people are out there who've like, look, I've got some spare cash and an idea, and I can be like, great, I've got some spare cash and I know a few artists, let's go. That's the dream for Board and Sorcery, to also help smaller people make products they want to make.
Fantastic. And I love as well that it's a balance, right? It's a balance between how do you progress your current games versus like how do you then cherry pick the next suite of ideas as to basically what gets your attention and your focus, right? Because we all have so many prototypes, either physical versions or ideas in our head, right? That can be hard to kind of sort through what gets the love and what doesn't. So it's it's exciting that you do have a pipeline there, and a system that it's one bigger game and one smaller game that helps you prioritize what gets that focus.
Yeah, and I'm trying to stick to it, and it's quite hard.
Yeah.
I think I've never come up with more games in a smaller period of time than I have in the last 6 months, when I've just basically been locked into two. Pretty much before, I was like, yeah, I'll play a Fat Cats for a bit, oh, I'll play something else. Oh, that's probably why it took 6 years. So
Yeah.
now that I'm like, no, don't touch anything else until these are done
Yeah.
and released,
Yeah.
then yeah, it's hard. So.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, mate, yeah, did you have a question? It's been fantastic chatting about that. I'm sure we can chat on camera and off camera for a lot longer. But yeah, before we wrap up, did you have a question for me at all, the community, that you'd like to ask? And how it works is either I can answer it directly, or if you have a question with the community, I'll ask our next guest that question basically, so we can hopefully you close the loop on it. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah, cool. I guess I think I had two questions, but like my first one is based on your sales background as well. Is how do you effectively pitch? We've already mentioned it. You want a hook, you want the crux, you want the thing. But do you have any tips, or does anyone else have tips on great ways to pitch to the community? Like, how do you pitch Capture without Marvel?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that it's hard is probably the ultimate piece. But even how I've designed my website, I think coming back to the feeling of it is quite key. And then from that, distilling it into your buzzwords. So kind of how I've refined it for Marvel, so to speak, is like it's a strategic, frenetic, highly interactive game featuring all your favorite Marvel hero and villains, where you battle your foes to capture the Infinity Stones. So it's trying to get that element of, and I can expand on what does strategic mean, what does frenetic mean, why is it interactive, how does the battling work, what roster is featured with the Marvel heroes and stuff. But I'm trying to hit enough of those core hooks through those buzzwords on hopefully getting players a bit more engaged on exactly how the game works and plays.
Yeah.
I think one that, and it probably depends on who your audience is from a pitching perspective, like what would be the angle to, if it's a B2B comms, so trying to pitch to a publisher versus trying to pitch to a retailer versus trying to pitch to the general public. The last one's more of the general public. You could probably also go down that path with a publisher, because it's ultimately like, why should they dedicate their time and their resources to your game when they've got a production schedule probably out for the next 3 to 5 years that you're trying to break into? Very different to a retailer, where it's probably a bit more about the economics, what's your marketing plan, who's going to be the target audience for your game, how does that fit into their target shopper who's coming into their stores. So it's a bit more clinical as opposed to the game mechanics side of things. So I think probably the overall first point is knowing your audience, and knowing what they're looking for, because that will tailor it accordingly. But I think even like to try and get those buzzwords, like think about it, write it down, distill it, think about the reactions, as we've said. What makes the game fun? What are some of the reactions that comes through? Like the whole, you get to have a mutiny against your mates. Like that just articulates the hook so simply, right? And that's the crux of the hook for Treacherous Tides. What I found useful has been a really useful resource is even jumping on Amazon. Like the globe, like the US Amazon page, which has a lot more games on it than our little Australian one does, just to see how like the really popular games, how they signpost, what their key hooks are, and just literally like copying 20 or 30 of them of games that think are quite comparable to what we're trying to get out there, and then trying to bucket it into themes. And there'll be some stuff that's a bit more generic, that's easy to learn, or quick to play, quick to learn, available for a wide audience. But there'll be a few more extra ones that do have a bit more sizzle to it, and they're a bit less generic, that I've tried to then think about, like there are some themes here that are just beyond the hygiene factors. Do they resonate with my games? And if they do, how can I kind of weave them in a way that feels authentic? So so I think I'll use that for some of my, like the American football version of Footy Feud that I'm really hoping to bring out to market next year. I'm using some of that in terms of even how I can think about setting up a web page or what
Yeah.
goes on the back of PAX. And I'm not just explaining how the game works, but also here's why it's fun,
And
fundamentally.
you touched on two really good points there on the last one there. Is like you copying that pitch. That pitch should be across everything.
Yeah.
Like by the time that you get to a point where you're ready to producing, you like I think even on Treacherous Tides, it was Mutiny Mateys. Like oh sorry, we had three M words on there that we just kept running with.
Hmm.
And it was just like Mutiny, Mateys, and Mischief. That's it.
Yeah.
And we just they're the three, like you said, you get those little buzzwords and or those
Yeah.
hooks, and it's planned from there, and that's it. Mutiny, Mateys, Mischief. Someone asked
Yeah.
me what's the game about 3 words. That's fine. And the second point you touched on that I thought was amazing as well is also yes, knowing your audience. I forgot to mention that as well. I remember at every convention I've gone to, there's always been someone who works for the sciences who was dressed up. He's like, you can tell they've got like jumpers or university or things that are scientific and or nature scientific things. And at the crux of it, Fat Cats Inc. is a game about climate change.
Mm.
And so you pitch it to them, it's a parody on climate change, and they're interested. I don't need to tell them anything more. They're just like, how do you mean? Like, what's going on? I'm like, yep, cool. I've got a doomsday clock, and we've got production killing the earth. Like, and they're just already in.
Yeah.
And I don't need to spend hours telling them about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
That's something that they're
right.
really interested in, right? Like, it doesn't have to be war and peace. It's just what's the thing that's going to get them to think, oh, I'm intrigued to understand more about that. And then you almost get their permission to then go the next layer down and the next layer down and so forth.
Yeah, and I had a really good, I was right next to another climate change game. Shout out to Carlos, I think, and Climber. Last year at Collaboratory. And so, when we saw one person interested, both people were interested, and they'll play both of us. And so we had a great backing of the whole idea there. His was a lot more serious and saving the world, and mine's a lot more fun and destroying the world. And so we had a lot of fun together. So
yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Well, mate, it's been fantastic to get to know each other a little bit better over the course of the last hour as well, and hear a bit more about your background, what you got out of PAX, and what's in store next on the game design journey. Really, I think just to wrap up, I think that I really love the insight that got you started on it as well. That as opposed to video games, it can be really hard to kind of get that minimal viable product and then test and iterate really quickly. That's one thing that you've been able to do with your games really successfully. That's meant that you've got the design process nailed, but then you can focus on other areas of your business in order to, again, bring your vision to life. And when you then did look at how do you take this a bit more seriously or how do you spend a bit more time on it, there's a really clear plan there that it's a bit more focusing on the supply chain side. It's not just how do I get the game side right and hand off to a publisher. That your vision is bring it to life more so yourself, and then thinking about what are those actual physical components that you need to then understand how am I going to source this. So it's not just thinking that more time equals more playtesting, but more time equals like how do I actually bring this product to life? And if you can't supply, then you can't sell fundamentally. So I thought that was a really key insight.
And touching on that one thing is just like having a goal for every month is kind of how I got through the last time. Like you asked me how much time am I able to dedicate to? I can't tell you tangibly what day a week thing.
Yeah.
But if I just kind of have a goal, so in January or February, my goal was to work out the box. Box dimensions. Oh my god, making sure your tokens and your boards all fit in the original box, let alone space. Things you don't think about until you have to get to it.
Yeah, so true. Yeah.
I also stupidly sent off the box designs for Treacherous Tides and then woke up at 4:30 in the morning realizing I didn't put a barcode on there. And turns out you have to register for a barcode if you want it to be accepted at places like Amazon. So I'm there researching at 5 in the morning to get this done. I was like, great, I've done the box now. But so there's always something. There's a million things you're going to miss. But if you set yourself a goal of every month to kind of learn something or learn how it's done, you'll get better at it. And
and I think that's a really key point. when you're being accountable to yourself. It's how do you be accountable to yourself if you're not working with a publisher or if you're not working with a partner. How do you still keep things moving at a pace that you don't allow yourself to procrastinate?
Yeah.
Having a macro compass even that you just spoke about towards the end of one small game, one big game to continue the design energy, but then having a goal each month, I think is a great hybrid of the macro and the micro with how ultimately can keep progressing. And I think, mate, again, thanks for being so open with what you shared about the PAX scene as well. What it took to be selected for Indie Rising and how you took last year's learnings from PAX when you're in the collaboratory section to begin thinking through, okay, with my design choices, how can I add some theatre to it? And I thought it was a cracking job in terms of with the hats, with the treasure chest, with the chocolates, which was much appreciated. Again, you just want people to have fun, right? But then some of those learnings as well that potentially don't do the Kickstarter at the same time. Use it as a way to build your community ahead of time so that you have really strong engagement and multiple interactions before a Kickstarter goes live, or how you can capture people's details on the spot, be it through a Google form or a QR code. And if you are testing a longer game, like how you can just nail what that vertical slice is. And I think that vertical slice is almost the same as the elevator pitch, right? Like the elevator pitch is verbally, why should you sit down and play this game? And then that vertical slice is, what's the most fun angle from this game that I can squeeze into 15 minutes? How can I nail that so that people walk away from this table ultimately wanting to scan the QR code and then 3, 6, 12 months down the track, ultimately buy your game if it's on a Kickstarter or on a retail shelf. So, a great mix of what worked, what to amplify for next time, but then also some things to introduce next time that you took away from a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, definitely. And, I still think it's 100% worth it no matter what sort of stage you're really at. You'll always get something out of PAX. And obviously, the more polished your product and that more polished that vertical slice, that pitch, that thing, practice it. Practice it now. Go to your local conventions, go to your local board game shows, go up to people at a cafe, ask them nicely, and just practice what you've got. And start that ball rolling for something like PAX. If your goal is to be at PAX next year, start the work now. Start every month looking into, how do I get something printed? How do I get something made? How do I get t-shirts done? What do I want my booth to look like? And just because we rushed a lot of little things towards the end and it still worked out for us, but that's probably only because I've had a lot of experience in those little areas. I honestly was like, cool, I can do that. I know how to do it. I can leave it till kind of last minute. And then some of the stuff is like, I think Trisha's ties rocked up a week before PAX. The shirts rocked up 3 days before PAX. PAX cards came 2 days before PAX. So don't leave everything to last minute. Get things done.
Yeah, and I think there's almost like a beautiful analogy there that it was literally the week after AFL NRL grand final, right? So it's like if that is your grand, for anybody who's watching and listening in, like if that is your grand final for next year, you want to be at PAX. What does your preseason have to look like, right? Because preseason for footy clubs starts next month pretty much. So how do you map out that 12-month journey? What milestones do you have to hit? What's your goal for each month? And how do you learn as much as possible between now and then if you are a first-time demo seeker potentially next year to ultimately make the learning curve a bit less intimidating?
Yeah, and reach out. There's some great community and there's some great support out there in the board game stuff, and shoot me an email if you desperately need to know stuff as well, and there's a lot of good resources that you can use that will help you make this easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Well, on that note, we might sign off for this evening, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in, as per usual. Again, any thoughts, comments, feedback, what you liked, what you'd like to see more of, what you'd like to see less of, certainly please let me know. 13 episodes in and hopefully a lot more to go. So thanks again, Tim, for being part of the show and, sharing so openly and candidly this evening. And to all the community, look forward to seeing you next time.
Nice, thank you.